Hey guys, Ivan here, and in today's video, we're gonna do something really interesting. We're gonna talk about Samson Dauda as Mr. Olympia. This is something I wanted to talk about, to make a video about since the Mr. Olympia. I haven't really had a chance, but now it's the time. We're gonna talk about whether Samson Dauda is the best Mr. Olympia since the Phil Heath era. Now, I definitely wouldn't put him above Phil Heath. Of course, not above Ronnie Coleman. I probably wouldn't put him above Jay Cutler or Kai Green. Now, as far as Dorian Yates, as a champion, he won 6 Mr. Olympia titles, and he's the original mass monster. He had some really dominant body parts. He was always in crazy condition, and everybody says that he looked much better in person than he does now in all the old videos and photos. So I don't know about Dorian Yates, because I think Samson is just much bigger, rounder, fuller. I think that's a very difficult comparison because it's two different eras of bodybuilding. Basically, yeah, Dorian is the first mass monster. Everybody before Dorian can't even hang with Samson Dauda, Lee Haney included, everybody else. Really, Dorian is the first guy that we can compare to the modern bodybuilders, but I'm not sure, honestly. Flex Wheeler, Kevin Levrone, Sean Ray, all those guys in the 90s, I'm not sure. They're all very good, but I think it was a little bit different back in the day. I think we can compare Samson to all the guys since the 2000s, all the Mr. Olympias since the 2000s, and Ronnie Coleman, of course, is the king. He's number 1. In number 2, in my opinion, Phil Heath. In number 3, in my opinion, Jay Cutler. Then I would say Kai Green. I don't know how many of you guys will agree with that. In my opinion, Kai Green is one of the best bodybuilders of all time. I think 4th best, probably. He was competing against Phil Heath, and he almost beat him a couple of times. Even Steve Weinberger said that I think 2014 was one of the most difficult decisions he ever had to make as far as choosing the new Mr. Olympia champion. It was that close between Phil and Kai, and Phil was on that year as well. He was really good. And Kai almost beat him, and every year, basically, these guys collided. It was extremely close. I think Kai, with all his mass that he had in conditioning, and he was bringing the overall completeness, the wow factor, the freak factor, the size, everything, really, I think he was that good. I think he is 4th best bodybuilder in the history of bodybuilding. Maybe Dorian, I don't know. Me personally, I'm a huge fan of Dorian, but I think Kai was just bigger, and that's it. Fuller, bigger, rounder. So, in my opinion, Kai is number 4, and in that 5th best of all time, is it Samson Dauda? Well, let's see. Let's start comparing. So, before we get to the post-Phil Heath era, we can compare Samson to Dexter Jackson. Maybe we can compare Samson to other bodybuilders who never won the Mr. Olympia title, like, for example, Victor Martinez. But let's focus on only Mr. Olympia titles. I had to include Kai Green because I think he's that good. But as far as Dexter Jackson, who won the Mr. Olympia in 2008, if we compare the 2008 Mr. Olympia winning package of Dexter Jackson, or any other package really, maybe he was better in some other show that he didn't win, I'm not sure. But let's say 2008 was his best. If we compare that to Samson Dauda, who wins? Who is better, really? Well, the only thing that I would give to Dexter Jackson, really, is conditioning. His nickname was The Blade. He was definitely more conditioned than Samson Dauda ever was, but is that enough? I mean, yeah, maybe you can say his back was better in terms of he had better insertions, his lats were inserted very low, and he had some lat thickness, and his waist was very small from behind especially, so his back did seem very impressive, but as far as the thickness of the back, it wasn't on the level of Samson Dauda. So I don't think his back was bigger, right? Everything else, quads, arms, shoulders, chest, even the waist from the front, yeah, hamstrings from behind, and the leg width from behind, yeah, I for sure would go with Samson Dauda. I think Samson Dauda is a better Mr. Olympia than Dexter Jackson. After Dexter Jackson, we had, of course, Jay, and then Phil. And after Phil Heath, we really haven't had any sort of a legacy. The first Mr. Olympia after the Phil Heath and Kai Green era was Sean Roden. Now, Sean Roden back in 2018 when he beat Phil Heath, I would say his conditioning was spot on, like he was really conditioned and big and full for his frame, for his standard, but like if you look at the body parts, what did he really have that was super impressive? His midsection was amazing, and I would say his quads were really good, but then if you look at like shoulders, arms, chest, back, the only reason why he managed to beat Phil Heath that year was because he was posing better, his midsection was in control and Phil's wasn't, and like his posing, his transitions, everything was, very polished. So that's really the only reason why he beat Phil Heath. He had no body parts that were better than Phil's. Maybe I could say quads, but I don't even know about that. Midsection, that was the only thing. As far as like the muscular development of the bigger body parts, no, he was just not really on that level, and I don't think he's as complete, as big, as developed as Samson Dauda. Sure, you can go with Sean Roden if you prefer really good conditioning, really pretty lines, really good aesthetics, waist control, midsection that is tight and a small waist, stuff like that. But that's not what makes a Mr. Olympia. There are other things that we need to consider, and that's like the size mainly of specific body parts. So because of that, because of the overall size and fullness, I think Samson Dauda is a more dominant, better Mr. Olympia than Sean Roden. The year after Sean Roden won the Mr. Olympia, he didn't compete. Sean was not at the Mr. Olympia, neither was Phil Heath, and that year is known for like being the weakest Mr. Olympia in a long time. And the winner that year was Brandon Curry. Is that edition of Brandon Curry, 2019 Mr. Olympia edition of Brandon Curry, is it better than Samson Dauda? I mean, it was a very impressive edition of him, but he was the best guy on that stage on that day, and he deserved to win the Mr. Olympia that year, but his conditioning wasn't exactly great. It was decent, but he was like mainly full. Sure, he was lean enough, but he wasn't exactly super shredded, and he was blasting full. He was really round. His upper body was absolutely amazing, but the legs were just weak, right? They just weren't world-class legs. He still managed to win the Mr. Olympia because overall he was the best guy on that stage, the most complete. Like the legs were a weak point, but it just wasn't, the legs weren't that weak for him to lose the Mr. Olympia. So he deserved the Mr. Olympia that year, but even with that package, I don't think I can see him beating Samson Dauda. So I'm pretty sure Samson Dauda is a better bodybuilder than Brandon Curry at his best. Alright, now this is where it gets interesting. Big Ramy is the next bodybuilder that won the Mr. Olympia 2 years in a row. So that's sort of a legacy, I would say. Yeah, I guess so. He won the Mr. Olympia in 2020 and 2021. And that was the first year when he actually managed to bring the conditioning. His glutes were finally lean enough, shredded, I would say. And he's one of the biggest Mr. Olympias of all time. I think he was also at around 300 pounds on stage, just like Samson Dauda, but he's shorter. So one of the biggest Mr. Olympias of all time. Conditioning was good for his standards that were set before that. But was that conditioning super crazy? No, it still wasn't a super crazy level of conditioning, but that's not really an issue here because Samson's conditioning, even though it was the best it ever was at this year's Mr. Olympia, it still isn't like crazy level of conditioning. So as far as size and conditioning, they are pretty close, pretty equal. Maybe Big Ramy was a little bit bigger, but I'm not sure about that. It was very close. And I would say Ramy had a really dominant body part, and that's his legs. And he would probably beat Samson in that area, with size at least. But everything else, it was very close as far as size. Now, as far as conditioning, again, I think Samson was slightly better at a Mr. Olympia this year, 2024. So overall, I would say Big Ramy did have that wow factor, freak factor, right? Like he was really wide, really massive, really big with good conditioning for that year. And you can argue that he was potentially better in some other shows other than when he won the Mr. Olympia. 2015, I'm pretty sure, Arnold Classic Brazil is one of my favorite Big Ramy editions. But is this better than Samson Dauda? I would say it's more freaky. Maybe it's like more impressive, more wow. But as far as the completeness, the flow, the symmetry, the size and conditioning, everything considered, I think Samson is a more complete Mr. Olympia. So for me personally, at least, you guys can disagree if you want, but for me personally, Samson Dauda is a better, more complete Mr. Olympia than Big Ramy. And the next two guys that won the Mr. Olympia are still active today, and it's pretty much impossible to say who is better than who, because Derek Lunsford won the Mr. Olympia last year. He beat both Hadi and Samson Dauda. Hadi Chopin won the Mr. Olympia 2022, and he won the Arnold Classic, beating Samson Dauda. So I guess it depends on who brings what, who is on, who is off. But in my opinion, from what we saw so far, if you take all these guys at their best so far, from what we saw, like Samson at the Mr. Olympia 2024, Derek from the Mr. Olympia 2023, Hadi from 2024 Arnold Classic, what we saw so far, in my opinion, Samson is the best overall. Maybe you can say Hadi from the Arnold Classic could potentially challenge Samson Dauda. That's a very close one. I'm not sure about that. That was a very, very good Hadi Chopin, but Samson just has the size. He has the height, he has the size. He is definitely the biggest among these three, and he is probably the most complete. Like, what is Samson lacking, really? The only flaw that you can find on him would be maybe the insertions of the lats. Not the back overall, just the lats. You know, Hadi has those pointy, cinto-ish delts, small forearms, not the most conditioned back usually. His hamstrings are lacking, his adductors, I would say. Derek also conditioning in the quads and like from the front overall, the size of the legs too. So Samson is definitely more complete, he's bigger, he doesn't nail it every time, but once he does, it's lights out. So in the end, my conclusion is that Samson Dauda is the best Mr. Olympia since the Phil Heath era, and in my opinion also probably 5th best bodybuilder of all time, 5th best Mr. Olympia of all time. At least his 2024 version, Mr. Olympia version, and we're potentially going to see something even better at the Arnold Classic and maybe even better at a Mr. Olympia next year, but we'll see about that. As of right now, that's the way I see it, guys. If you see it otherwise, feel free to tell me down below in the comment section. If you guys enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. For more content like this about bodybuilding, stay tuned to this channel, subscribe. Thank you so much guys for watching. See you soon, all the best, and bye-bye.